Well, senior members of the American Nuclear Society and dignitaries on the dais, dignitaries and invitees in the audience, my fellow professionals in the nuclear energy field, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to be here this morning in this very important platform today when we are discussing in general nuclear energy, in particular the future scenarios, particularly addressing the enhanced levels of safety which is expected for large scale deployment. I thank the organizers, particularly American Nuclear Society, for inviting me to be present over here. I happen to be the Vice President of the Indian Nuclear Society as well. So, on behalf of the Indian Nuclear Society, I welcome American Nuclear Society's delegation to India, and we look forward to having some dialogue on matters of mutual interest when we have a meeting tomorrow. Well, advanced heavy water reactor, as was introduced, is a topic close to me. We have been working on it since last 2 decades, and I would like to very much share with you some of the features of this reactor which appear to be so relevant today. And this is a reactor which is now ready for design, ready for implementation. Already practically all the engineering detailing has been completed, and most of the work has been carried out on the basis of large scale engineering experiments, which I would be giving you a very brief glimpse of. Well, this reactor is a technology demonstrator for thorium utilization and advanced safety technology, both them together. As far as the fuel is concerned, once you design for thorium and uranium-233, it becomes possible to use practically any other fuel as well, because essentially for uranium-233, you need to provide more number of control and shut-off rods, and once you have provided for that, it can accommodate practically any of the conventional fuels as well. So, it has got a flexibility of fuel cycle. We do produce electricity 300 megawatt. In addition, desalination capability using the low grade heat coming from the steam cycle. I have already indicated thorium utilization. These are the major design objectives: thorium utilization and associated technology development. And this reactor, why we have configured the way I am going to describe a little later. Basically, a boiling water cooled reactor, pressure tube type of a configuration, vertical geometry. We thought we should better make use of the well known pressure tube reactor technology, which we have been operating for such a long time, building also for such a long time. We are having 18 pressurized heavy water reactors under operation today. 4 of them are now under construction, covering a range of 220 megawatt to 540 megawatt under operation and 700 megawatt under construction. Now, having defined this, when we thought of thorium as the main platform which will be used for this type of a reactor design, we conceived that for large scale deployment of thorium, which will be the mainstay of Indian program in the future, and also which we feel in the post uranium era, thorium could provide very valuable role in continued sustenance of nuclear power. We felt thorium will come into picture, really speaking, when the number of reactors in the world have grown very, very large, particularly in our country. Surely there is a huge requirement, and so you have to cater to a scenario when thorium exists. Also, we have to cater to a scenario when a large number of reactors exist, and that's where for a densely populated country like India and many other parts of the world, we have to have some kind of a more detailed thinking about the kind of reactor we must be building. And we can't be certainly demanding land, sufficient land to provide for the exclusion radius, not only the exclusion radius, around the exclusion radius, sufficient amount of restrictions perhaps in the emergency planning zone, which as we know today is going to hurt us even in the very near future. And therefore, the last bullet you can see, the safety objectives of this reactor address future large scale deployment of nuclear power in densely populated regions with reduced land availability. Development and implementation of generic technologies meant for this purpose were a part of this AHWR design. We thought of it 2 decades ago, but post Fukushima this seems to be so relevant today. Well, I already said this is a 300 megawatt reactor, vertical pressure tube type, boiling light water cooled and heavy water moderated reactor. Why boiling light water? Because we felt pressurizing heavy water per se is a meaning you have to contend with system for recovery of tritium as well as the heavy water, which will certainly come out from some of the points. and this is a costly system. You don't allow it to go away, but you have to recover it. And secondly, in presence of thorium, the large absorption cross section in light water really doesn't matter much. Thorium itself absorbs neutrons, so contribution of light water vis-a-vis heavy water as a coolant really doesn't make much difference. And that's where it's the boiling light water coolant makes the life very simple. The boiling light water straight away can go to the steam drum, and unlike pressurized heavy water reactor, therefore we do not have a steam generator coming on the way. Produces 65% of power from thorium in this plutonium-thorium version. As I said, this reactor can be designed for a range of fuel. Another version which I will be talking about is low-enriched uranium and thorium version, where the percentage power from thorium will be somewhat lower. Several passive systems, I will be coming to it. One most important part here is passive shutdown system to address insider threat scenario. I will also touch a little later. It has a design life of 100 years. In fact, other than the zirconium alloy components which cross the core, there is nothing which really degrades. We have made sure in the choice of materials, in the choice of pre-stressing for the reactor structures, and most of the welds are now under development for very low residual stress configurations, and therefore, we are now reasonably sure that this design life can be achieved, and a lot of in-service inspection and in-service maintenance capability. Only pressure tubes have to be easily replaced during normal shutdown, and that's why the pressure tubes and coolant channels of this reactor are different from what is existing in conventional CANDUs or our own PSWRs. On the left-hand side, you can see the status. The design validation has been carried out through extensive external program. We had a peer review of the design done by the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited quite a few number of years ago, and in principle, pre-licensing safety appraisal was conducted by EARB. They suggested quite a lot of improvements or maybe more validations, and all that has been done. Site selection is in progress for this particular reactor. Well, for some reason it is in, yes. Well, this shows the fuel cluster. You can see there are 3 rings, and if we are using thorium and plutonium, the inner 2 rings, the blue colored ones, contain fuel which is mainly uranium-233 based fissile material and thorium, and the outer ring contains plutonium. On the other hand, if you use low enriched uranium, then you have got low enriched uranium in all the 3 rings, because we provide 20% of the fuel in the form of uranium. That itself is 19.75% enriched, and balance 80% is just thorium oxide. So therefore, the fuel contains some amount of U-238, some amount of U-235, and mostly thorium. In both the configuration, you can see in the 2 columns, we are providing some information about the enrichment values, typically around 3 to 4% enrichment. One important feature you can see that the uranium-233, plutonium enrichment is the outer shell of the plutonium option. We are providing a kind of a variable enrichment. The bottom, where you have got mostly water phase, has higher power density, and we provide 4% enrichment. The top of the fuel is enriched only to 2.5% to match the heat generation with the heat removal capability, which is mostly a steam water mixture at the top. We have carried out several fuel cycle calculations. I am not going to include in this presentation, but it does turn out that it makes better use of the natural uranium. After all, if most of the power comes from thorium, you would only expect to have this kind of a scenario. Thorium provides inherent proliferation resistance for those markets where it really matters, particularly if you look at the low enriched uranium thorium version. To begin with, if somebody does a reprocessing, if he is at all able to dissolve this fuel, very difficult to dissolve this thorium oxide, he will get all in hand will be low enriched uranium 19.75, considered to be good enough for a proliferation resistant, a kind of a diversion proof material, and balance is all thorium. Same fuel after irradiation to 64,000 megawatt day per ton, which is our target burn up, will contain as much as 8% of plutonium. And the plutonium comes 8% of plutonium-238 in that plutonium which comes out. And the total plutonium actually will less, because you have really started with only 20% of uranium. So amount of plutonium produced is 1/5 of what it could be otherwise. And then minor actinides are not to be built up, because you start low down the ladder with thorium. So therefore, there are several other issues associated with long-term disposal, which are very favorably considered here. Well, just one slide on the physics design characteristics, just to show on the second curve on the right-hand side on top. This talks about the negative void coefficient for the entire zone of burn-up, because this is one limitation in pressurized heavy water reactors, very beautifully addressed by having 2 fast-acting shutdown systems. to address the slightly positive White coefficient of reactivity, which happens if the moderator, if the coolant tends to boil off. In this case, we decided to have, because it's after all a boiling water reactor, boiling is intended to happen. We decided to have a negative White coefficient for the entire range of operation, and this has been achieved with a lot of great meeting the technological challenges. The coolant channels had to be brought very, very close together, creating difficulties in fueling, but all that has been sorted out. And on the bottom left hand side, you can see the bottom peaked axial power distribution. This is because the two levels of enrichment we have in this particular fuel for plutonium. Therefore, more power is produced in the bottom half, and therefore, that's where water resides. Most of it is actually water. Steam starts forming midway on upward, and so it makes good sense to have a differential enrichment for the fuel. And the bottom right hand shows the proportion of power which is to be shared across plutonium and thorium. You can see the red curve. Plutonium starts burning very fast. It gets depleted. In fact, some people say that it can be used for plutonium incineration. Although we are not in that business, we wish to use plutonium for fast reactor program rather than for incineration. But then still, it makes for some people, it could make a sense. And uranium-233 keeps on increasing in terms of share of power, reaches almost up to 80% towards the end. But on an average, as I said, it produces about 65% of power all across the core with different burn-up configuration. Interestingly, some power also comes from uranium-235, because uranium-233, after absorbing few neutrons, climbs up to uranium-235, and that also tends to start producing. That's the bottommost curve, which starts showing up after some time. Now for safety, because this is the main theme of this particular talk. What should we do for safety? Fukushima is glaring, but of course all this was decided long back. First important requirement is you must be able to shut down the reactor under all conditions. Whatever happens, you should be able to shut down. And as I said, in pressurized heavy water reactors, already we have got two fast-acting shutdown systems. Here, in spite of having a negative White coefficient reactive, we have retained the two systems that include one mechanical shutdown system. A clutch gets released if a power failure takes place or under some signal conditions, and the mechanical shutdown rod drops. And a liquid poison injection system, once again on a signal, the liquid poison gadolinium nitrate is stored in some high pressure vessel that enters the core through nozzles and is there. Failure of both of them together is extremely low, 10 to the power minus 7 on demands. If there are 1,000 reactors operating from 1,000 years, even then you will not get one failure of both of them happening together. So then why we are considering a scenarios where we are considering non-availability of both SDS1 and SDS2, shutdown system 1 and shutdown system 2. It's again a kind of a scenario one could find in the large scale deployment scenario, very large number of reactors, some odd things may be happening. And what is that odd thing is an insider threat, which I think one cannot perhaps rule out. If maybe today we can provide enough for physical security, it is existing, but then one could consider, because after all electronics is something one could play with. And therefore, we assume a scenario of both failure of SDS1 and SDS2 to take place, and that's where a passive poison injection system comes into the action. Now, once you are able to shut it down, whatever happens, there is important requirement to remove the decay heat. I mean, the bottom line in Fukushima was not earthquake nor tsunami. It was bottom line was station blackout. We have to have a scenario where without any power in the reactor, you should be able to remove the heat from the core, and that's where the passive systems come into the action. And it has been proven even in the existing reactors, particularly in our country, we have demonstrated we have got enough margin for removal of heat after station blackout. Time-wise, we have got enough margin, and in that time frame, one could bring in additional sources of cooling. But I'm talking about ASWR, where we deliberately have designed it to accept a very large period of station blackout. That's what is mentioned over here. And ultimately, the containment must survive whatever external threats come, whether it is earthquake or tsunami or any external aggression, because that's where all these passive systems are located. So these are the three primary requirements which any reactor in the world, I think, if it possesses, it will be safe against most of the threats, internal, external, and man-made threats, which is most important. Internal, external threats, I know today also because of huge amount of defense in depth. Practically entire generation of current generation reactors do possess such characteristics, and there is really nothing to fear. But when we are talking about thousands of reactors running across the world, mainly in large populated region, I don't want emergency planning to be one of the factors which will be creating trouble. So therefore, you have to demonstrate for that kind of an era that this situation does not arise at all. And that's where the advanced heavy water reactor has been configured with the kind of scenarios which I am talking about. Now, these are some of the important passive safety features. As you can see, the arrows show you what are the decay heat removal mode. Actually, under the normal operating conditions, the entire 900 megawatt thermal heat is removed from the reactor sitting at the bottom with the pink line removing the heat through natural circulation. Slightly boiling water emerges from the core, buoyancy driven, goes to the steam drum. Their steam is separated, where you see the other arrow on the top, comes down after the removal of steam through natural circulation, and finally the steam goes to the steam turbine, etc. As you can see, and you will see if you look closely, somewhere a desalination plant heat exchanger also sitting there. But the green line, the long arrow on the top, indicates the path which will be taken when there is a failure of the decay heat removal through the normal mode of condenser. That's where, with using the natural circulation, decay heat can be easily removed in a large pool of water which is sitting right at the top, and that's about 8,000 meter cube of inventory of water sitting at the very top, which serves as the heat sink for a range of scenarios, also provide the emergency core cooling system water for the low pressure injection purposes. And talking about the emergency core cooling, you can see what are the sources of water. Plenty of arrows there, and unfortunately I can't point it to you, but you can see one is pointing to the top, one is pointing to the emergency core cooling system, high pressure injection. There is high pressure water injection in case you have got a failure of the piping. It cuts into at 50 bar pressure. Further down, under normal about 5 bar pressure, you start getting water from the gravity driven water pool, and we have not shown here, we have got a passive depressurization system to hasten the process of transition from accumulator to the gravity driven water pool, which contains practically unlimited amount of water to survive for a very long period. And we have got a passive containment isolation system, so that the environment inside, if it is having a high pressure, the U limb which you are seeing gets filled with water. So, even without any power, supposing we are unable to close the ventilation dampers, these dampers actually get sealed by this water seal, and therefore, the environment inside is insulated from outside, and you do not have to release the radioactivity outside through this route. It can be done only in a controlled manner, which anyway is provided. And this ECCS water, as you can see in the fuel sitting on the right hand side, gets injected right into the fuel through perforations, and that's where it's required and cools right there. Another one, this is what I am talking about, the passive poison injection in the moderator. Once there is a mismatch between power generated and removed, any region, it could be reactivity transient, it could be control rod withdrawal without any, or any region because of which shut-off rod do not drop in. The power increases, you are not able to remove the heat, steam forms at a higher and higher pressure. And that's when at progressive things start acting without any operator action, without any instrumentation control, without any electrical power supply. Passive valves come into action to first try to remove the decay heat, which certainly cannot help in bringing down the pressure, starting about 70 bars. And subsequently, at a pressure of 84 bars, as you can see the thick pink line at the top, the steam comes, ruptures a rupture disc, acts on a valve which is shown now in red color, which opens the liquid poison injection line to the moderator inside the reactor vessel. Reactor gets shut down passively, even if the two shut-off rods SDS1 and 2 fail to act under a threat. Under certain situations, both of them. As I said, the probability is practically 0, but even then consider. This is how we shut down the reactor in the ultimate case. And this shows enough number of water is there in the core, not only at the top, but also at the bottom. It is after all a heavy water moderator reactor. A huge inventory of heavy water is there. It's all located inside a water cooled vault. Another light water is available there. And eventually, if there is a loss of coolant accident, where does all the water go? It goes to a cavity, and that's where the 3 arrows to the end tend to converge to our reactor. It's a moderator heat exchange, moderator heat sink, water in the Calandria vault, and the flooding of the reactor cavity, which can happen in the case of a loss of coolant accident. And this once again shows you passive poison injections to some region, which I don't think I will repeat. At a pressure of, this shows at a pressure of 70 bar how the steam is going to the steam turbine, normal operation. If there is a shutdown without any significant threat, normally heat will be decay, heat will be removed once again through condenser. You can see the blue line. But if due to some reason there is a complete station blackout and the condenser is not available, seawater pumps are not available, then pressure rises, and at a pressure of about 74 bars, I think, it gets directed to the isolation condensers, and further on, as I mentioned just now, at a pressure of 82 bar or so, if the pressure continues to rise, the shutdown is coming through a liquid poison injection here. And this gets, all these features get translated to a variety of scenarios which we have examined. More than 90 scenarios we have examined. I am giving you only some of the enveloping scenarios. Design basis accident, 200% inlet header break. We have a line of 600 millimeter diameter, which is our inlet header. We assume it breaks into two suddenly. And what happens then? As you can see, this is showing you the clad temperature in the worst channel. Average hot and the hot pin also. The temperatures remain within 900 degree Kelvin for the initial few seconds, and afterwards they drop below the normal operating temperature and progressively get cooled. A very acceptable scenario, no harm done. In beyond design basis event scenario, we assume there is a prolonged station blackout and also a failure of normal shutdown system. There is a station blackout due to some reason, insider acting on the things. We are not able to drop the shut-off rods, neither the poison comes into the action, and then we have got the station blackout continuing for a long time. This is what this whole set of bullets says. What happens then? At 84 bar, as you can see in the bottom left hand curve, once the pressure rises there, reactor gets shut down by the passive device, and thereafter pressure remains more or less consistent with the temperature, which is shown on the right hand side. Clad temperature practically remains stationary. In fact, this acts like a big pressure cooker. Pressure remains more or less decided by the decay heat as balanced by the removal of heat by the isolation condenser. And this analysis period was 7 days. For 7 days, without any power source, you are able to manage. Consider that against the recent accident which took place, where I think in a matter of 40 minutes, we ran out of a heat sink capability. And this has been shown, Fukushima type of accident. I will not repeat because a worse scenario has been already shown to you, where there was a failure to shut down also. Here, clad surface temperature remains around 130 degrees Celsius even after 10 days of accident. So, you can see practically a stagnant temperature profile on the right hand bottom. Now, all these curves which I am mentioning to you are not just theoretical calculations. We have carried out a very large number of experimental validation over last 10 years. Very huge amount of work has been done, large experimental facility. You can see these bullets. So many facilities have been set up, and not only in BARC, part of it actually BARC facility is the NPCIL R&D center in Tarapur. They also have, and we have joined hands to set together large capacity. IIT Bombay, IIT Kharagpur, and there are several development activities which have been carried out apart from the thermal hydraulic experiment, fuel rod simulator to simulate the full power delivery. And I don't think I will go to it because it cannot be pointed out here. We have got major AHWR experimental facility. Top one is a critical facility actually, basically for reactor physics, reactivity coefficients we have tried to measure there. It's already operational since April 2008 in my center. Integral test loop is a large 40-meter tall structure where we have put the natural circulation height of this particular reactor. And then there are, the third one is another major facility which is now coming up. It will have a capability to deliver 15 megawatt of thermal power to the fuel clusters to simulate practically a burnout situation to finally derive the realistic margin going to the accident condition. This is being set up at Tarapur. And these are all several separate effect test facilities for natural circulation and other passive systems, several loops, facilities, so many of them. I don't want to, many of them are having parallel channels, some have single channels. I talked a lot about the passive poison injection system. That valve needs to be developed, and this is where we did it. There are many other experimental validation programs which output is coming in the form of fundamental studies on single and two-phase natural circulation, steady state performance, stability under various transient conditions, reactor startup conditions, and determination of critical heat flux, which is also a very important parameter. In addition, several components and systems have been developed. For example, conductance probe. How do you find out in a pipe how much void is there, how much liquid, how much steam? Void reactivity feedback. Based on this sensor, we have designed loops where the negative void coefficient related characteristic of the core is simulated in a loop. Power is varied as the voids go up or down, and that's the second curve. Similar power measurement, flow meters, all these things have been discussed. And the last three pictures at the bottom where the page number comes, are development of different kinds of passive valves, because we depend on passive valves which are not of commercial grade available. So we had to go through all the developmental stages, including detailed stress analysis, codal compliances, and then finally experimental validation, all that done. Well, I discussed a lot about what we have done for ASWR. Now let me summarize my views. I must say, and I am sure Jain Sahab will mention, Mr. Jain will mention in the afternoon, all the Indian reactors offer robust designs that have been verified to be either immune to or safely address accident sequences that occurred at 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. However, large-scale global expansion of nuclear power is essential and inevitable. Whatever you can say in the short term, there may be going up and down like share market, but then it will happen. It has to go up. There is no other way. Now, in a large-scale deployment scenario, which we envisage for India, today we have got barely 20 reactors. I expect this number to go up to almost like 500, 600. If we go for smaller reactors, it could be even higher. There, what do you do? Pressure on scarce land resources, particularly in densely populated countries and regions, will call for approaches to address nuclear safety in a manner that eliminates any need for intervention in public domain, just like any other industry, under any plausible event scenarios pertaining to the nuclear power plant. In fact, my vision is, why, if we have got this type of reactor system in hand, can we not build a reactor a nuclear power plant in a land which would be perhaps vacated by a coal-fired station, where you have got the access to the grid, you have got cooling water supply, you have got trained manpower, extremely economic proposition. And so I feel convinced that if we master this technology, if ASWR is shown to demonstrate all of them satisfactorily for, let's say, a decade or so, we will be ready to get the regulators and the public convinced that yes, this is doable, and that's my intention. And therefore, the last bullet says ASWR will demonstrate the implementation of some technological approaches, particularly relevant for water-cooled reactors to address this need. There will be other designs for other coolants. Surely, our fast reactor program also is addressing passive decay heat removal system, and that will also come through. So this is my final conclusion. Thank you very much.